All right, guys, what's up? We are back here with another week of DFS golf. This week we've got the Northern Trust being played at Ridgewood Country Club. But before we jump into that, we're going to do our weekly tradition of looking back at last week's tournament and assessing how we did, what worked, and what didn't work. This week I'm going to go with something a little new, and I'm actually going to show you what who I rostered and my ownerships. And yeah, so last week was the Wyndham Championship, and this was my uh, set of guys who I decided to roster last week. First thing that probably jumps out at you is no Snedeker. So obviously it wasn't a great week. To be honest, I don't. I didn't particularly love a few of my decisions and a few of the results. That doesn't mean they were bad decisions, all of them. But an example of that would be Sergio. I think my head was in the right place when I decided to go a bunch of Sergio. Basically, my thinking was at 9,200, uh, he was around guys like Ryan Moore, Russell Henley, Daniel Berger, guys who I thought would be more popular and who I thought were probably less likely to win. Because we all know that Sergio at his very best, which frankly we may never see again, but it's still possible that he has a peak in him that those other guys don't have. And yet his ownership is always very, very low because, I mean, and rightly so, he hasn't been good in a really long time. But as you can see, he actually ended up being lower owned than both Horschel at 9,500 and Henley at 9,400. And if I had known that was going to be the case, I would have not gone Sergio at all, and I would have loaded up even more on this. A success was Neiman. I mean, I talked last week about how just brutally underpriced he was, and yet somehow he was only 22% owned, which, given his pricing in GPPs, is ridiculous because he was the best player in the field last week, in my opinion. For DraftKings, especially given his propensity to make birdies. On the other hand, Cabrera Bello, who actually outplayed Neiman, was just too high owned for that tier. Well, I mean, what I mean by that is, as you can see, I went with a bunch of Stricker, I went with a bunch of Ryan Moore, I went with a bunch of Neiman, and I went with a bunch of Cabrera Bello. And they were all in the 17 to 25% ownership range. And when you just go with a bunch of chalky guys like that, you put yourself in a spot where you're just going to struggle to really stand out as far as building your team, and you really, really, really make it so that if those guys play well, you still need a lot more to happen. Whereas Snedeker, who is 6% owned, if you had him, you obviously had a lot more leeway. Not even because he won, but because of his ownership. So this week we're going to try and focus a little bit more on ownerships. I did have a few good plays. Connors, for one, at 6,500 was only 2.5% owned, which was nice. CT Pan, who got second, 10%. Yeah. Oh, Ryan Armour played well at 6%. So I'd say Armour, Connors, and Pan were my best plays, and they were all relatively cheap. That is the big benefit I've found of doing this kind of research. Is I really think everyone knows who the good players are, and we'll see that again this week. Everyone, I mean, you're not flipping coins, but you kind of are in the sense that, I mean, you're not. Brooks Koepka could be the lowest owned this week, but everyone knows who Brooks Koepka is. The real value in doing this kind of research is figuring out who of the cheapest guys is most likely to play the best at what course, because for the most part they're all going to be low owned. Chris Kirk at 7,500 was 33%, which was a bit surprising because that's high, but outside of Kirk, you don't really see anyone who was under 8,000 over, say, 15%. Um, Brian Gay was 16%. But yeah. And that leads us into this week's Northern Trust. It's being played, like I said, at Ridgewood Country Club, par 71, 7,300 yards. But we're kind of, I feel like, flying blind here. And I usually release videos on Monday. But to be honest with you, I've been kind of struggling. And it was kind of a relief to watch other videos and read other articles and see that other people seem to be kind of struggling too. One of my favorite people who I watch spent a few minutes talking about uh, tournament history, and that doesn't really matter because uh, the Northern Trust doesn't play here every year. It's only played here. It only played here in 2008, 2010, 2014. So Dustin Johnson playing well here from 2015 to 2017 doesn't matter at all. So you can't look at Northern Trust results, and you can't really even. I mean, you can a little bit, but how somebody play? I mean, Phil Mickelson winning here in 2008. I mean, I guess it matters because you have good memories, but it's just been 10 years. I mean, it can't matter as much as form and the type of player they are now based on the course. So rather than looking at results from those 3 years, I think it's way more valuable to look at what type of player had success those 3 years rather than the name, the shots, and the skills they had that propelled them up the leaderboard. And when you look at those three tournaments and you look at the results and you look at the players, three traits, I guess, really stick out. The first is driving accuracy. There's long rough again at Ridgewood, and while 7,300 yards is relatively long for a par 71, that's a bit deceiving because there is a 650-yard par 5. So I do think accuracy, given the rough and given it's not actually that long, just being in the fairway is going to be very helpful, and consistently gaining strokes off the tee is going to putting yourself in good spots is going to lead to success, which is why one of the stats I weighted this week is driving accuracy. You'll see I do have strokes gained off the tee because I think it's important to be able to differentiate between the accurate drivers, and I mean, if a guy's not super accurate but still gaining a lot of strokes off the tee, you have to figure out why. And so I didn't weigh it as much as accuracy, but I do think it's important to have in there. Strokes gained tee to green is just always going to matter. You want guys who are consistently, I say this every week, you guys want who are consistently gaining strokes on fields, ball striking. But the second one that stood out is approach. It just, I mean, it always kind of matters because the people who are making birdies are the people who are consistently around the pin. But it actually stood out more here at Ridgewood. So we're going to be looking at guys who really thrive from on their second and third shots, third on par 5s, obviously, because they seem to have a lot of success here at Ridgewood, or they have in the past. And the third stat was sand save percentage. Now, obviously, you don't want your guys to be in bunkers, but there's a ton of traps out there and no water. So if a guy is in the rough off the tee or is in trouble around the green, it is likely going to be in a bunker, which is why, sometimes we look at bogey avoidance, but the people who are going to be avoiding bogeys this week are going to be the ones who are when they are in trouble in a bunker are the ones who are most likely to uh, get themselves out of trouble. Excuse me. All right. So given that information, um, we can start with the players, and we'll start with the elite tier of players. One guy who really stuck out, and he always does, and it's really hard because he's always high owned, but Justin Rose seems even more underpriced than he usually is. He's the most accurate of anyone. Let's see when the next guy who's more accurate. All right, all the way down to Rafa Cabrera Bello at 7,900. He's the most accurate driver of the ball. He gains a ton of strokes, tee to green. He's good at approach. He's not elite. But then, par 4 scoring, putting, sand save. He's just so good. He's just so good. He has 19 starts this year, 13 top 10s. He scores more DraftKings points than anybody but Dustin. He's just really good, and it just makes no sense that he's always this cheap. I mean, he isn't really ever under 10K except for majors, which, majors always have soft pricing. But even when it's not a major, he's like 10.4 and he's like the fourth most expensive. So Rose is a guy that should play really well here, but should also be high on, so you got to watch out for that. There's honestly arguments to be made for everyone up here. Let's go from this. I'm not gonna touch Brandt because him and Scott, they just seem overpriced and a lot of overreacting to recent results. Like, I just don't want to pay Snedeker. I just don't want to pay $9,000 for Snedeker in this field. But going up, I mean, Webb has just played great in tough fields. He's a great putter, a great bunker player. He's 15th in approach. But he's not accurate off the tee, and that's his weakness. But I mean, he probably won't be super high owned because 9,200 for Webb Simpson in this field. We've seen him in the 7,000s. In fact, I think he was 7,700 at the PGA Championship 2 weeks ago. So his ownership should be low, especially given he's right below Tommy Fleetwood, who is accurate off the tee, who is not great at approach, but he's above average. He makes a ton of birdies. He's just another super solid player who's going to be in good spots off the tee. Gains a ton of strokes tee to green. Molinari, everybody knows about his ball striking. Spieth, the argument I would make for Spieth is he's Jordan Spieth at the cheapest we've ever seen him, and we know what he can do. And his ownership might be low, despite the fact that he's the cheapest we've seen him in a long time. Rahm, same thing. He's sub 10K, very good ball striker, but he's not the most accurate. Man, this is just so tough. Tiger is Tiger. He's amazing from the fairways. That's his bunker number, but we know he's actually a good bunker player. He putted well. He scored on par 4s. He makes birdies. Brooks is Brooks. He just won the PGA Championship. He's played great in tough fields. He's that in driving accuracy, but we know he can just pound the driver when if he gets hot. Day is an unbelievable putter, an unbelievable bunker player, but he's not accurate and he's not great out of the fairway. So, all these guys have arguments to be made. JT and Dustin are JT and Dustin. I don't need to tell you what kind of players they are. They both just have all the strengths, despite not being the most accurate. All these guys you can make arguments for and have small cons. So, honestly, I know I'm not really, I can't build your teams for you, but I know I'm at the same time I'm supposed to point you in the right direction. So I know I'm not really doing that. I'm gonna tell you that who I like the best, but I'm gonna be super honest and tell you I really don't think you can go wrong with any of these guys. And my main piece of advice would be to use your gut and try to figure out who you think is going to be the lowest owned. Because as far as like a ceiling and projecting results, I could see any of these guys playing really well and winning. Um, I mean, I guess I wouldn't. I'm not going to confidently say I can see Spieth winning. But would it surprise me? No. And at 9,600, Jordan Spieth at 9,600 and sub 15% ownership. Hey, that's that. I don't see why in a GPP you wouldn't take a flyer on that. But the three I like the most are Day, Rose, and Fleetwood. And my guess is they're probably going to be among the three most popular. But if I had to gun to my head choose three guys who are going to most consistently be around the top of the leaderboard, it would be those three. And they also, their pricing just allows more flexibility going down, which you're going to need because there's good value to be had down here. Like I said earlier, Scott, not a huge fan this week. He's not accurate. I mean, he does approach well. I know he plays tough fields well, but I don't know. And I know he's putted better since. I just think that's too high a price to pay for a guy who really isn't going to win that often, and this course doesn't seem to set up very well for him. Hideki's been hot lately, and he'll likely be low owned like he always is. Zach seems a bit overpriced. That seems a little too high for Zach Johnson. I'm a big Zach Johnson fan. And hey, I mean, look, 26th in approach. We know about his short game. He hasn't putted up to his standard this year, but he has made a lot of birdies. That price just seems a bit high. Cantlay, I'm gonna like a lot this week. Not as accurate off the tee as Zach, but I just think, man, I'm kind of second guessing. Cantlay is just really, 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 really good at hitting the ball, and I know his approach number isn't as good as Zach for the season, but I do believe he is a better iron player than Zach Johnson, like overall, even though the numbers don't exactly show it. So yeah, I think Cantlay at 8,600 is a good. Patrick Reed. Let me be clear. Patrick Reed does not rate out very well here at all. But at 8,400, a guy who really seems to step it up in big moments, he's going to be low owned. I mean, Paul Casey at 8,300. We know Paul Casey's always super high owned. Tony Finau, 8,500. Always super high owned. Cantlay, going to be high owned. Kuchar, going to be. Maybe Kuchar won't be like as high owned as he is in majors when he's 7,600. But, I mean, Kuchar's. I think he's won here before. And he's just the type of guy that people are like, all right, he's going to make the cut. I'm going to throw him on my team. Point being, Patrick Reed is the super sandwich play. And I don't have a statistical argument to make for Patrick Reed. My argument is it's Patrick Reed, a guy who has had success in majors, in the Ryder Cup, playing in a playoff event. And you're going to get him at probably the lowest ownership of anyone in this entire tier. And it's not like he's the highest price. He's below average for pricing in the 8Ks. So I like Patrick Reed as like a weird contrarian play. I know he's not in the best form. And hey, it's a volatile play. He very well could miss the cut, and you'll say, damn you, Jeff Rass. But he can win this tournament, and if you have Patrick Reed on your DraftKings team and he's in contention on Sunday, I'll tell you what, you have a good chance of having a DraftKings team that can stand out and be unique. Obviously, one player alone doesn't do it, but I mean, if Paul Casey's in contention on Sunday, congrats on being one of the 30% that owns him. Hatton is just, whew, boy, this just does not seem the course for him at all. Honestly, his stats across the board are not good, aside from his putter. Bubba, I don't know. I mean, 8,000 doesn't seem like a lot for a guy who we know can score points and we know who can play well. It's tough fields. But at the same time, I could just see him being in trouble all over the place. And not only is he inaccurate off the tee, but he doesn't even approach the green that well. And he doesn't putt well. Yeah, I'm going to be off Bubba. I'm going to be off Bubba because why pay 8,000 for him when you can pay 7,900 for Cabrera, who's probably my favorite play of the week. I mean, he just and it's a perfect time for him to let down a huge percentage of people because he will be pretty high owned. But I mean, look at his stats across the board. He combine that with being in form. I mean, 25th in accuracy, 14th in approach, 67th putting. I mean, he's just above average in every single stat. And he's just the type of guy that should play well here. Which means he won't, because that's how the world works. And that's okay. But I do really, really, really like his price. Schauffele had playoff success last year. Doesn't really seem to be great here. You can get Leishman at the same price. Leishman definitely seems like the better play. Approaches the green better, makes more birdies, putts better, scores on par fours better. I think in the high sevens, I like Leishman and I like Woodland. Don't love Noren. He's a really good putter. But man, he just is so disappointing all the time. And yeah, I mean, he's not very accurate off the tee. Doesn't make a lot of birdies. He's okay at approach. He's above average. Going down, more approach guys. We got Poulter, not 7,600. Wow, this is a nice little group of guys right here. They all rate out well. Poulter, more, nah. I mean, he's third in the world in sand save, makes birdies, he putts well, scores on par fours, he approaches, he's accurate off the tee. Kevin Knott, 7,600. He's a guy I can get behind. And Ian Poulter as well. Ian Poulter even more. Because while both are in form and both have the stats, Ian Poulter seems like a guy more likely to battle in tough fields. I know that's very intangible, but if I had to pick between Ian Poulter and Kevin Knott, 7,600 in this field in this tournament, I'm going Poulter. Ryan Moore played well last week despite a very bad Sunday. He's going to rate out well at most courses like this because he's so accurate off the tee. Look at that. 4th in accuracy, 24th in approach, 6th in par 4 scoring, tied for 6th, I assume. But man, he just even last week, he didn't really score that many DraftKings points for his position. And that's because, I mean, look at his birdie or better percentage. He's just such a bad putter that he doesn't seem to even when he scores well overall, it's not like he's putting a bunch of birdies together and having eagles and streaks and stuff. I don't know. I mean, I'd just be cautious with Ryan Moore and know that for him to score well, you need him to place well. Keep scrolling down. Grace, 7,500, another guy who's played well in tough fields. Pretty solid across the board. Doesn't really score well on par fours, but good putter. Meh, bunker player. Phil Mickelson at 7,300. I think a lot of people will tell you to take a flyer on Phil. And look, I'm not going to say it would be a bad pick. Phil is one of those guys who doesn't need to place well to score DraftKings points, and that's big. It's probably more important without a cut because you just guarantee Phil as many rounds to everybody, and look, he's going to make a bunch of birdies, whether he gets first or last. But the thing is, He's so bad off the tee. That scares me a little. And then you have two guys in Stanley and Billy Horschel at the same price who are going to be lower owned. Like, I feel like most sites are going to tell you to pick Phil. And that makes me want to go Stanley and Horschel because you can get guys who are 5th and 18th in driving accuracy, who are not as nearly as good at approach as Phil, but are passable. You know, they have similar ball striking numbers altogether. They're both solid putters, not as good as putters as Phil. Don't make as many birdies as Phil. But I do think you're getting, let's say Kyle Stanley is 90% the player right now that Phil Mickelson is. You're getting 90% of Phil Mickelson, who is much better suited at this course and probably going to be lower owned. And that makes me want to pick Stanley and Billy Horschel. So look, I mean, you just got to weigh what your team is like at that moment. If you have already made a contrarian play, if you have a Patrick Reed, if you have I mean, honestly, I can't even think of who is going to be the fade of the elites. I guess Spieth. If you have a Spieth or maybe a Koepka because of sandwich pricing. If you have a Koepka, if you have a Hideki, if you have a Patrick Reed, by all means, just throw Phil in there, because ownership will matter less. But if you've gone chalk up until this point, I'd recommend looking away from Phil. And that's stuff you just got to think about all the time. You got to think about, because if you do go Stanley or you do go Horschel and they're 5%, or they're going to be low owned, that frees you up to go with a Justin Rose. You need to try and find both so that your team is unique and so that your team also has the highest unique ceiling. All right, sorry about that mini rant. List is always cool. Not the most accurate off the tee, but I mean, he's going to make birdies. He's good at approach. He's decent out of the bunkers. I can get behind going Luke List pretty much any week. Brian Gay played really well last week. Henley rates out well. Super accurate off the tee. Both him and Gay are 27th in approach. That's beautiful. Good at putting. I mean, we've got a guy who's accurate off the tee, great at approach, and good at putting. And he's 7,100. Talking about him, so I mean, Henley, who was, like I said earlier, 9,400 last week, 7,100. Henley seems like he's going to be a good play. Grillo, I mean, he rates out super, super well. And I didn't go with him in the PGA Championship for the first time in months, and he played well, which means I'm going to talk myself into him, and he's going to let me down again. But just know that Grillo is Grillo, Keegan, and CT Pan. Yeah, let's ignore CT Pan. Or not ignore him. I mean, he's really accurate off the tee, and he's in good form. And he's going to be low owned because of the other guys at this price. I mean, Keegan and Grillo are just, people are going to go with them. And for good reason. Look at Keegan, 15th in accuracy, 6th tee to green, 3rd approach. If he can putt well, I mean, like always, that's the thing with Keegan. But these courses where accuracy and ball striking really, really matters, Keegan at 7,000 is going to be a bargain. There weren't too many sub-7 guys I liked. Streelman has had success at Ridgewood before. He's great at ball striking, 12th in accuracy, 21st tee to green, 23rd in approach, 11th in par 4 scoring. He's similar to Keegan at 6,900. Hadley and Ches rate out well. Hadley's not too accurate off the tee, but very good at approach, makes birdies, 10th in birdies. Ches Breevy is really accurate off the tee, really good at approach, scores on par 4s. So they rate out very well at 6,800. And then Joel Dahman, accurate, 6,800 as well. Accurate, great at approach, scores on par 4s, makes birdies. Dahman's another 6,800 guy. So I guess I was kind of wrong. I mean, That's 4 guys at 68 and 6,900 who I can get behind going. Ryan Armour and Brian Harmon at 6,500. Look, I mean, I could have sworn Harmon's approach numbers were better. I know he was great at approach last year, so I guess this has just been a down year. But, I mean, both are really accurate. Harmon's a great putter. Harmon makes birdies. They both score on par fours. Armour's great at, or average-ish at approach to the green, but I mean, if you want to set a team with multiple 9K plus guys, you're going to have to look at these guys. And I think, there's some value in having Armour or Harmon on your team that allows you to just have multiple elite guys. All right. And that about wraps up the players. I'm going to do what I do each week and just sort by the formula and scroll so that you all can at least get a feel for who rated out the best according to my formula. I hate that it does this. All right, so Dustin is first. I guess I didn't really talk about him too much. Wish it didn't do that. So Dustin is first. Rose, Thomas, there's Grillo, there's Cabrera Bello. Cantlay. Hey, Phil is. I didn't really say DeChambeau, but I'm kind of souring on DeChambeau, to be honest. Not as like a player overall, but he hasn't been great lately, and he just doesn't really ever do much in these really tough fields. I know he won Memorial, but I don't know. Combine his how inaccurate he is off the tee, and he's pretty popular in general, especially at that price. I think I'd look away from him. Poulter, Ryan Moore. I guess Brooks just really doesn't wear out that well if he's bad. And yeah, that'll just about do it for this week. As always, thanks to anyone who took the time to listen. If you have any comments or suggestions or criticisms, they're all greatly appreciated. Feel free to comment, subscribe, tweet at me. I'll link some of the videos I watched in the comment section or in the information. And good luck to everyone this week, and I will see you next week.